Hello and welcome to Life Challenges, better known as a conversation with Dr. David Clayman. Our topic for the day is dealing with danger, and I was prompted to go in that direction based on the fellow who shot 18 people and who had had 2 weeks of mental therapy prior to that, and wondered, what can we do if we have a family member, if we have someone we know that we suspect has a problem? What options are there for us?
Well, this is a really complex issue that deals with law enforcement, it deals with the courts, and it deals with the mental health system. So you've got to realize that this is not just a simple answer. It never is with me anyway.
It never is, no.
So here's the deal, is we have had mental hygiene or involuntary hospitalizations on the books in, I think, all 50 states forever. And in West Virginia, if somebody is showing distressful or disturbing behavior, the first thing you can do is try to have them voluntarily go to the hospital. Go to the emergency room when they're agitated. They'll have them evaluated and they'll offer to admit them on their own. If in the emergency room, or if in the emergency room, the personnel feel that they are not capable of taking care of themselves, a danger cause harm to themselves or others. That's just the phrase you're going to hear a lot of.
Right.
Then they can make a recommendation to either voluntarily, and that's what we usually used to do, is we used to say in the emergency room, we think you need to be in the hospital. If you come in voluntarily, the deal was you could sign out voluntarily. If you don't come in voluntarily, we're going to have to commit you. So then you go through the commitment process. The commitment process can be established either that way, that you kind of go through the involuntary commitment, or if the person refuses, if they're so out of control, if they're so distorted in their thinking, you can then work to have a mental hygiene petition filed where, I'm not going to go through all the steps, but you end up having somebody submitting a thing saying, I think this person's dangerous. You go to the Mental Hygiene Commission, you submit this, they can then do a pickup order.
Where do I find a mental hygiene?
It's down at the courthouses, and they're supposed to be in every county, and they're going through reform right now, so I don't want to because it's really complicated. But what happens is if somebody is presenting in an aberrant way that looks like they could cause harm to somebody or cause harm to themselves, it's both. And I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody is really agitated and they destroy property and they make threats to their family members and everybody gets scared. We've had a lot of those going on. People seek help, and they could have a pickup done by the sheriff's department and brought down, or they can get them down there, and then they have a hearing. In the hearing, the person who's being assessed has an attorney, and the prosecutor's there, and they have a mental hygiene commissioner, and they have a psychologist or a social worker to do a mental hygiene evaluation, and to determine whether, based upon the mental health professional's opinion at that time, whether they're presenting an imminent risk. At that time, presenting an imminent risk. So they have to, by the time the hearing's over, somebody has to be able to say, we believe this person, if we don't do something, is a danger. Mm-hmm. And they get hospitalized. Now there's a whole series of 72 hours and how long you have to be there and a reassessment and all this. But very often when you get to the hearing, the person who's been agitated, even if they've been on drugs or even if they have a serious mental health problem, can get themselves put together. And so when somebody asks them, are you planning to kill yourself or somebody else? You have these plans. I read so many of these things. It's very scary that somebody's been running around, they got weapons in the house, they're threatening a spouse, they're threatening the family members, they're threatening their neighbors. They come down there and they said, oh, I won't do anything. And if the person says that, and the psychologist, social worker, the mental health professional that does the evaluation for the Mental Hygiene Commission doesn't see them being that much of a risk at this time, or the Mental Hygiene Commissioner thinks there's something else better to do with them, they're released. That's on that stage. Is
it the same process that people use for the elderly when the elderly can't take care of themselves?
Well, it's in the same piece of the code.
The same type of thing. People probably can relate to that a little bit quicker.
Yeah, well, it's in those cases it is whether an adult, they have guardianship or conservatorship or have their, in quotes, their rights taken away to make decisions in their lives to protect themselves and others. That's the goal, so that we have a mental hygiene process that is supposed to take care of themselves or others.
Right.
That's the simple part. Because people get released sometimes, and they shouldn't be. Or we don't have any alternatives. And I'm involved with and chair of what we call the Dangerous Assessment Advisory Board for the courts in the state of West Virginia. And when people are released from the hospital, or ready to be released from SHARP, and they're brought back to the jurisdiction, this is after a criminal action's been taken and they're put in the hospital to either be restored to competency to stand trial, or they've spent their time in the hospital and they've served their time statutorily and they're getting ready to be released. Some of the judges don't want them released or don't know what to do. So the legislature 2 years ago established this advisory board that has 2 psychiatrists, 2 psychologists, and then representatives of rehab, DHHR, a whole bunch of other things. There's 9 of us in the committee. And matter of fact, we're supposed to meet Wednesday, but I don't think we will. And the courts can now request that we reevaluate the case after there's been a dangerous risk assessment done. This is important in this case up in Lewiston, whether they should be released into the community or what we can do. And in very many cases, if there were alternatives to this part, we could release them. But they have to be in a structured setting, they couldn't have access to weapons, they couldn't do other things. So there's this whole system behind the scenes that's going on here. And for us, when we're doing mental health evaluations in a standard fashion, anybody that comes into my office when I did therapy, and even now when I do assessments, we ask, are you suicidal or you're homicidal? And we don't ask it in questions. We can ask it in a bunch of ways. Have you had any plans to hurt yourself or hurt others? Have you had thoughts first? And that's ideation. Do you really want to do it? That's intent. And then do you have a plan?
Do people really fess up to that?
Sometimes. And if they do that, then we have to determine the legitimacy of it, and then we have to talk to them about what to do. And in that case, we used to say if they would make that statement, we would hospitalize them. We would stop everything and say, all right, we got to put you in the hospital because it's too dangerous. And now the literature and the best practices acts are saying that causes more trouble, that if you send them home and you make sure there's no weapons, then that's better because, again, a whole bunch of other things behind it. Now, you never heard me say a whole bunch of other things behind it because it's that complicated. I can go down rabbit holes on every one of these topics.
Is it different if you're the parent or if you have a power of attorney?
Well, power of attorney is different, or if you're a guardian, when somebody's rights to take care of themselves, or they've been determined not capable of caring for themselves, then you're the guardian. They don't have the right to make that choice. Now you have medical power of attorney, you have other kinds of things that you can do. But the dangerous stuff is what is scary, because just this, I've not even talked to you about people that we think are going to be at risk, who have weapons, who have made public threats, who have said things online that we can't get to, or like with the guy in Lewiston, it's now coming out that there were a whole bunch of warnings and people were trying to get help, and they were trying to, even his family members thought he was getting loopy, right?
Yeah.
And somebody has to take an action. And so when family members have somebody who's making threats and being upset, very often they're afraid to make the mental hygiene move to get the person taken care of. But then we really have the process of what do we do when we get them. So drugs, problematic in the world now because they can make people think badly and make them become aggressive. I mean, not make them. And not all people who do drugs go around killing people. We were just in Las Vegas, and the first question that everybody that was out there, because we hadn't been out there, is, can we go by Mandalay Bay where the guy was shooting so they could see what it looked like? I've been having people asking me if they can go see it. And one of the men was in the hotel where the guy was shooting. He was on the floor below him.
Wow.
Could hear. So anyway, The problem we have, Sharon, is that people believe that anybody that is going to do what the guy. So I gave you this piece because we're doing this all the time. We've got mental hygiene commissioners. We have problems right now because if we don't want to send them to the hospital, we have, well, if they don't look like they belong in the hospital, we have to send them home because we have no step down.
Is there not something at CAMC? Didn't they used to have an inpatient?
Yeah, they got an inpatient unit, but you have to commit them to that if they won't go in voluntarily.
Okay.
And so, oh man, this is crazy. So you have the problem, that, and the system it's undergoing revision right now because it's outdated. We don't have any step down. We have no crisis management. We have a couple crisis management units in the state where we can do short-term 72-hour holds to see how people are doing and then reevaluate them and see if they go out. But hear how many times I've said evaluate. Mm-hmm. The part for us that's so difficult in the mental hygiene world, they must be an imminent threat, an active threat that if they don't get hospitalized, then it's highly likely somebody's going to be hurt. And I'm using all these terms because we don't predict that kind of risk.
Most of what we read in the newspaper is the guy goes berserk, tears up the house. They call the police. Police come and take him. So isn't that the first?
Yeah, but guess what happens if they don't go to the hospital? Where do you think they go?
They go to jail, I guess.
Right. And this is the problem we have. I said law enforcement, mental health, and legal system, and the correction system. So these people, if they are not, if they don't meet the criteria for being hospitalized, or, and this is another little powerful little piece, if there are no beds, no secure beds, we don't know what to do with them.
How many secure beds do we have?
I'm not good with the numbers. I got them on a sheet at home.
I mean, do we have a lot of places?
There are places we can send them. We send them to Clarksburg. Sometimes we can send them to Highland and Charleston.
I forgot about Highland.
And we can do some of that. Sharp, Bateman, the state hospitals, River Park. Some of these places will take them, but there's not a lot of beds. You know, if you call to get mental health help now, most of the time you have to wait weeks, not days. I just had a cop call and beg to be seen. He's going to be seen in 3 weeks. They wouldn't fit him in, and he was scared, and they didn't know what to do with him. So we have this system that if they're not, we had a situation a couple months ago of a man that should have been put in the hospital. But it was a Saturday. We didn't know where to, we called around, there were no beds. And the recommendation was, why don't we just rearrest him because he did something wrong, because he'd just been let out of prison. We didn't have a place to put him. So we made arrangements to put him in the hospital. So what we're working on now are ways, so now, because of my chairmanship of the DAB, which is the Danger Assessment Board, I'm also chair of Senate Bill 232 study group on how do we divert these people out of the legal system and put them in the mental health system. What do we do with people that are doing this? And we haven't talked about the shooting people. We're just talking about people that have problems or
right.
people that have committed crimes. So let's just use Mr. Lewiston. There are color codes. Then the people that have been in the state in psychiatric hospitals are under care, should not be able to buy weapons. There's various levels at which people are complying with reporting that they have somebody there. Sometimes when you report people, you run into the problem that if the person's ticked off, they may get a lawyer and sue you for doing stuff like that.
Right. And
so civil rights gets into this of when do we take people's rights away? And when you're a mental health professional, especially if you work ERs, in our state we have a whole bunch of rural ERs that are just not set up for it. We have mental health systems that are supposed to back them up, but the catchment areas are so huge that it's hard to get somebody on a Saturday night or 2 o'clock in the morning if they show up. So I just want this to I always make things complicated, but things are really complicated. And so what we find now is that we don't have a coordinated system that is legally allowed to do some of the things we need to do. So the man in Lewiston had, they weren't just red flags, whatever can be worse than a red
banners,
flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was screaming that he was in trouble. And I haven't read enough about it because I'm just tired of seeing, and everybody's saying, in this case, the connection between his hospitalization and what he did is an interesting issue. So the family is upset, and he was in the hospital. So this is different than Sandy Hook, the kid that was dangerous, and his mother bought him a gun, and all these people that are, and there's something the matter with them, and we'll go into that last piece of this. He was in the hospital. He was medicated, we think, and he was released. Now, what do you see at the bottom of the discharge summaries from hospitals? Patient is stable, no longer saying blah, 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 bad stuff,
right.
Kill, is not manifesting any kind of thought distortions, is being released either under his own thing and going home, but on medication, and he has an appointment set for next week to have follow up, blah, blah, blah. Now, if everything worked out nicely, maybe the guy wouldn't have done what he did. But the number of people that stay on their medicines who are in that situation is less than you would like. And he was released. And if that day he was assessed for dangerousness, he may not have been found to be dangerous. He'd been in the hospital. He'd been given treatment. I think he was there a couple weeks.
Right.
He had talked about being angry and all this kind of stuff. They treated him. And people are not being held in the hospital for long times now, for the most part. We had a very tragic case here in Kanawha County where family had been begging the mental hygiene system to take care of him, and he was so smart. When he got in, he said, "I don't know what they're talking about," and he was absolutely rational as you could get. I'm distorting
right.
that a little bit, but I had to do the last dangerous risk assessment on him, and in this case, the man was very disturbed, had psychotic and delusional thinking. We force medicated him, and that's another issue. When people are really agitated and very disturbed, we have to go through a whole process to forcibly medicate people, so that their self-destructive and harmful thoughts are, and the agitation is all brought down. And the resistance in the legal world and the civil liberties world is, oh, you're going to medicate them against their will. They still have a will, even though they're expressing harm and everything else. We then have to go through a whole process to get the courts to allow us to forcibly medicate. And in one of the more recent cases, forcible medication changed a person. But you don't know whether they're going to stay on their meds. You don't know whether they're going to be compliant. And so we've got all these things that go on, and they get to the mental hygiene place, and the mental hygiene commissioner says, "I think I want to put him in the hospital." They have the person pick up the phone, no beds, no beds, no beds. They're not going to throw somebody out, so either that or they find a way to arrest him and put him in jail. And now we're trying, I'm involved with the company that does the mental health work in the jails and prisons, and in the jails it's really difficult. We have high turnover.
Right.
We don't have a chance to get their medical records. They'll say, "Oh yes, I'm bipolar schizophrenic," which is not a diagnosis, by the way. You can't. But they say things like that. I've been at River Park. I've been here, and it's Thursday night. How do we get their records? How do we get to talk to anybody, whether they're being treated outpatient or inpatient, to find out whether they really had problems? And now they're in the jail. We don't know what medication to give them. They may act out in the jail and then hit somebody, and now they have another criminal charge, and this explodes. So the guy that was in Lewiston, and some of the other people we've heard of who just have hate in their souls, and maybe they take drugs, or maybe they finally have had enough, or whatever else, and some of them are not mentally ill per se. They're just angry. So what do you do with somebody who's just pissed off?
I can believe that, because there's so much anger.
Oh, and it's reflected now, and then the gun debate and all that kind of stuff. Let that stay out there.
Yeah, because the NRA is saying that the red flag law is against, so that they can take people's guns.
They can take their guns, but who's going to make the step? And it's always with litigation, and it's not something that you can just walk in and say, "Hi, you have a mental health problem, we want your guns."
You know, it's easier to have an appendectomy. I mean, it's
easy to have brain surgery.
Right. I mean, Because the insurance bites you on mental health on top of everything, right?
Yeah, but when you're in the mental hygiene world, well, the shortness of stay is once somebody's stabilized in the hospital, unless there's a reason to keep them in, we have to release them. If they're no longer suicidal or homicidal, if they're more leveled out and they're doing well, and I don't know what the hospital records look like in Lewiston. They haven't released
Right.
those yet at this point. But what we're faced with when we have dangerous risk assessments is, are they dangerous? That's the first thing we have to predict. When they've been in the hospital for a while and they're getting ready to be released and they've been on meds, they've done some step down stuff, and now it's time to consider putting them back in the community. Well, a lot of these people are not ready to go back in the community, but we have no step down. So that we either have to find a way to keep them in the hospital or release them into the community, and we don't know. We're supposed to have supportive services, we're supposed to have this, we're supposed to have that. We don't have that. It's a complex system. Our 232 study group is about ready to release this. We're putting together the final draft of our report to the legislature. It is the most complicated thing. I went into this thinking, it's going to be really easy. We've got a lot of great, I want people to hear, we have a lot of great things going on in the state to try to deal with the homeless, with people with mental illness, with people who have committed crimes. I'm on 2 committees besides that, one for IDD, waiver people, intellectual and developmentally disabled, who are being transitioned back into the community. What do we do to prevent them from having to go back into the hospital setting? What happens with that is, for instance, with people with IDD, some of the IDD developmental problems, some of them, like on the autism spectrum, are very hypersensitive to changes in light and sound and noise, and they may just fly off the handle. And if it's your child who's a 27-year-old, 195-pound guy who's really upset, not criminal, but is acting because of what happens in their neuro processes, smacks his mother in the face. Maybe not even intentionally, but breaks her nose. And the family calls the cops. And meanwhile, he's been still in a rage, and he's destroyed property in the house. So we've got assault, we've got destruction of property, we've got real anger, and the police show up, and he fights the police, and now we have resisting arrest. Do you think that guy's going to go into treatment?
If he's autistic, wouldn't he already be in treatment?
Impatients, they're living at home. So they criminalize him. So we have that process we're dealing with. And we try to get them. We have nothing to transition. We don't have a robust enough system with all the players. We've been dealing with 18 different agencies to try to put this report together, 18 different people coming in. And we also include traumatic brain injury. We include cognitive deficits. We include serious mental illness. We have the substance abuse group, and we have now kids, all of whom are at risk. One kid who threatened to kill a teacher last week, a kid, not here, but so the problem we have, I as a mental health professional, if somebody comes in, and I've got a couple that really still bother me in my soul. If I believe somebody's a risk to themselves or others, I am duty bound, and there's had a whole bunch of attention with the thing called the Tarasoff decision. I was from California, but we're supposed to report them. We're supposed to take action, and then it gets complicated. Are you willing to sign the mental hygiene petition? What if the family doesn't back it up? What if the guy said to you, I'm going to tell you this, and I don't want you to let anybody know? Do you know what it's like to go home at night when you've taken a risk to let someone leave your office that said they're either going to harm themselves or others, and you do everything you think you do, and you walk home and you say, the one thing I forgot, what it might be. Unless you, given the mental health part, everybody says they have to be mentally ill, but not all mentally ill people kill people.
Right.
Even mentally ill people with guns. There's a tragedy going on out there. We don't have a coordinated system. The two systems don't talk to each other. In one case we dealt with this year, it was on a Saturday. I was out. I got a call from the prison system, and we had to call the sheriff's departments in 2 counties. We had to get a hold of this DHHR people. We had to get hold, and this took 6 or 7 hours. The person was sitting in the courthouse for 8.5 hours till they could be seen, and that we finally got him into the hospital, stabilized him. But then we had to take steps on how to not have this happen again. So when he got out, We just couldn't let him back on the street. He had no family here. He was from out of state. What do we do? So this is more than when people see this stuff on television. Yes, we could go and take their weapons. But how many times have you heard that they've gone to buy a weapon and they had a mental health history and they didn't check that box and the place didn't have any record of him being in because we don't have a centralized database, and he buys another weapon? If they're paranoid, if they're angry, and anger is not enough. I mean, anger is a warning sign.
Right.
But if we bring them into a hearing, do you think they're going to come across angry? No, if they're disrespectful or hostile to the attorneys or the law enforcement or the commissioner, we can do things. So dealing with danger is not as simple as it sounds. I do dangerous risk assessments all the time. Kids who have been accused of domestic threats or terroristic threats, people that have threatened people at work. What do? And very often we do a dangerous risk assessment, and from that we do a fitness for duty, and that's just not with law enforcement, that's with anybody working at a chemical plant or a teacher or whatever. So we do a dangerous risk assessment and we find them not fit for duty and we pull them off the job. And then we have to decide whether they need treatment or whether they have to be let go or whether they can go back to work. And I can't, because we didn't plan this topic, I could have given you more numbers. But in most of the cases when I do fitnesses, I have to get them into therapy. I've got one right now that has called a mental health center about 2 weeks ago, and got an appointment for the 21st of this month and is hurting. So I'm seeing him until he gets to the hospital, because I'm stupid.
It takes that long to get.
Yeah, and you call any mental health practice, they're overwhelmed, they're smothered. Many mental health professionals don't know how to deal with the legal system.
And there's not a lot of graduates coming out into the system, is there?
Oh, there's a lot of people going through programs quickly, but from I've got 1 minute and 23 seconds. There's a difference between standard mental health issues and forensic issues, which we really are touching on a lot.
Right.
Forensic is when you deal with the law and you deal with mental health, you deal with people not being competent to stand trial, and people being at risk. So what we do is we do dangerous risk assessments. We cannot predict exact behavior, but we can often predict that this person will still cause a problem, but that's not sufficient sometimes to take action. So I've done the fun part. If you want to finish this up next month, I will give you some other things, because our report will be out and I can be more public about. We're just in the final draft, so I can't.
That'll be interesting, because it's kind of a follow-up to what you're talking about today.
The legislature has shown an interest in trying to do this, but the dangerous stuff, we'd have to have big changes in the law, and they would have to grant people the right to infringe upon civil rights.
With that in mind, on behalf of Dr. Clayman, I'm Sharon King, thanking you for watching the Library Television Network. Till next time, bye-bye.